Merci beaucoup de nous retrouver pour la seconde partie.
Well, thank you for being here for the second part dedicated to cybersecurity in industry. I have the pleasure of moderating this half day, and we will start with our second roundtable, responding to an industrial incident, retexts, and best practices to deal with the management of a cyber incident that could stop the production of a company altogether, or even worse, have any kind of catastrophe. So don't hesitate to react, and we'll share your questions and maybe share at the end of this debate. And to enlighten us on the best prevention and the response, I'm going to now introduce our guests. Maxime Descamps, who is GSI for dairy products and the Bell products. Hello, Maxime. Nicolas de Besson is in charge of cybersecurity and RSSI of the Mousquetaire group, and Vincent Dali, who is a technical director, a Swiss OT and IoT Nozomi Networks. So could you please tell me what you mean by this concept of incident? Well, Maxime, yes, of course, I'd be delighted. So according to me, an incident, a cyber OT incident, is something that is going to impact the production systems, your machines. It could have an impact on the quality of products, the availability of products, and, of course, a financial impact at the end of the day. Nicolas? I will add that the incident has of course, a malicious origin. People are used to managing a production, classic incidents, and here we're talking about an incident with a malicious and, of course, a cyber origin. And as far as we are concerned for publishers, it is an event that could be cyber but also operational consequences, and this is what we'll try to detect. There is the physical incident, as we mentioned here, but also the prior incident, the sign that something wrong is happening on the network, and that's what we try to capture. Perfect. Okay, so as part of an industrial incident with face authorities, we have the question of anticipating the catastrophe. So how do we implement an adaptive organization to circumvent this risk? Well, my opinion is that there is no miracle cure. You have to anticipate, prevent the incidents, and drill. Get ready for it. In case of an OT incident, we more or less mastered the IT part. We restore safeguards and so on. But this is slightly different, so we could have some impact on machines. I'll give you simple examples. At Bell, we make milk and dairy products in general, and we have major, enormous tanks and mixers. And if the mixer stops because a PLC is subject, the whole container turns into butter, and it takes 3 days to clean. So you cannot open an empty milk, you have to actually clean it. So the OT incident can have an impact on the real world, and there are some actions, and we do that in cooperation with the production teams who know the business. And another phase I'd like to talk about is that it's the crisis management. How do we get prepared? We need a shared crisis department. We can have the IT and the OT. These two words have got to work together, talk to each other, know each other, have the same language, even though it's difficult, because these have been historically separated. Now we work together, so we have to work together, and that's the challenge. So we have to make drills, in crisis management drills, to react as much as possible. So could we also subcontract the crisis management? Well, it is possible, and that's what would be my advice, actually. To be very clear with you, we have enormous pressure when a plant or several plants have stopped. So we have a pressure from the COMEX, from a number of stakeholders, and what you should do, or my advice, would be to have a third-party partner who's there with us who's going to manage the crisis in cold blood with a certain experience, because these are people who do that every week. And their experience is an enormous asset, especially the serenity, because it usually lasts a whole week. So it's an enormous asset to have someone who can drive things, coordinate the crisis. And this is essential for me. Sometimes you want to do it all on your own, but it's not the best solution because we have trouble prioritizing. So my advice is to be supported by a crisis management expert. Would you like to add something? Well, humbly, in an approach like this, we are going to help accelerate some of the observation and collect information, or at least understand where the problem originated from. So we're part of the ecosystem to speed all that up. As part of a more serious crisis, do we take enough into account the pressure by the catastrophic possibility of an OT cyber attack? Well, this is a critical element, maybe the main difference between IT and OT crisis. Basically, we've got a computer or several computers are down, and the objective is to repair them so we can restore the normal operations, whether it's accounting, invoicing customers, supplying service to customers. But overall, you're repairing computers. In the OT world, it could be much more complicated because you still have the computer aspect, the IT aspect, because computers in plants now are just a PLC is a computer. But the second aspect is the consequences. Because in OT, you have a hardware aspect, human aspect. It is clear that if the cyber attack has made something explode in the plant, you may have some injuries or fatalities. You may have a toxic gas releases that is going to contaminate the neighborhood. We've seen that a few months ago, a plant who actually smoked up a whole department. It wasn't a cyber attack, but it could be. So the true difference with is that the crisis management team must manage these two aspects. You mustn't underestimate the fallout of hurting or killing people, even beyond my scope. Not just my employees. In certain aspects, fatality it does exist in some plants, but companies are not necessarily prepared to have to explain to the public authorities why people in the neighborhood were hurt because of a cyber attack. So this is really a communications aspect that goes way beyond the cyber aspect. As Maxime said, you need a unified crisis to manage the technical aspect of cyber attacks, but also the consequences, human consequences, technical, financial consequences connected to the industrial catastrophe. Thank God, not all processes are fundamentally dangerous. If milk turns into butter, it will not kill people. It is significant for Bell, but if we're in chemicals, for example, you probably heard about Seveso. It is clear that when you have a Seveso risk, the crisis department faced with a cyber attack will have to manage the consequences of a Seveso type accident. Okay, now Vincent, can we detect and answer by using the IT tools, or do we have to think differently in terms of processes and tools? Well, I've used my... I'm a private pilot, so the rules is that you should be seeing things. And when you're an amateur pilot like me, if you get into a cloud, the average life is 3 minutes because you lose all your references and you end up in catastrophic situations. All this to say is that flying at sight is also a source of consequences. Just before we started this, actually, we have to know what's happening in my plant, and this is what we're going to provide. Now, from an OT point of view, what is going to be different is two important things. You have the physical aspect. You have a process that has to do with serious consequences in terms of incidents. And the other aspect is that the environments are heterogeneous. I mean, two plants or the same PLC used in a plant or on a boat is totally different. Well, we have the same system. So the response on an incident, as the way I mean it, is cyber incident. The way you respond will be different. Acting on a PLC that is used to distribute fresh water and one that actually drives a ship is totally different. So you can be inspired from IT. You cannot reinvent everything. Some procedures are very logical. There's also some competence in treating, processing incidents, but there is a requirement to converge with the issues of industry. You have to produce, you shouldn't stop, and the response to the incident means that we will not react the same way. And from the SOC, well, same thing. The OT SOC, I mean, you have some here where it is quite rare, but it does exist, and there is an interesting convergence to find the capacity to collect information and treat it, process it in IT. Now we have to find a relay to have these two worlds cooperate. And collaboration is something we'll talk about later, but I have the feeling that cooperation, collaboration at all levels is an answer to this issue. To find synergy, to learn and process these incidents. Maybe automating? Well, we can always try to do it, but we mustn't make mistakes. No, says Nicholas. I don't believe in that, no. I just will illustrate when I joined Nozomi Networks, I talked to customers, and the person I talked to in chemistry, if I stop my plant, it takes 2 weeks to clean it. In the way we detect, we have detection systems that have a potential risk of false positive. So we try to limit it as possible. If we consider that the emergency stop is something we've never seen, is that the tools consider as emergency stop as an anomaly. Can you imagine? You will stop the emergency stopping, and it may have consequences. So we'll go at it gradually, but I think automation will require human validation to ensure that everything's fine. Always, yes, always, especially in the industrial world. Right, to better manage the consequences, you need to have a full inventory. You have interconnection systems that facilitate the work, and also journals to and safeguard adaptive is protected. Is it always the case? Well, Nicholas, it's a no, isn't it? I would have said no about to all your questions. I think I've been in industrial cybersecurity for 14 years. If I'd waited to have an up-to-date inventory, I would have done nothing, because I know no industrial side that have a true up-to-date inventory of its hardware, its equipment. And not even talking about what Vincent said. And then we, in addition, just an inventory, the characteristics of a network and what's connected to it. In the majority of cases, I know it's the case for you, but in the majority of cases, we don't have the mapping. I cannot protect something I don't know, so well, we have to. We have a mapping that is that's 15 years old when they installed the production line, but it's very hardly updated because it's evolving all the time. When you have an incident, you have to find who's talking to whom and what's happening in the whole production system. It's very complicated. So we encourage at Bell to maintain the diagrams up to date. As soon as it is a modification, you need some traceability. When was the modification done? These are basic things. But these on a daily basis, when people are in the production are all in their job, they don't take time to look up. So there is some raising of the awareness that is necessary, and people must realize it's important to have a mapping of the plant. I think there's also an intellectual aspect, and sometimes people think that the documentation is up to date, because when they build an extension, they have a a file that describes what the integrators added with the whole inventory, what was delivered as part of this change. That includes an extremely detailed vision of the electric diagram of the network, but only on the part that was added. And therefore, the documentation of the plant is just some files on over 20, 30 years sometimes, but nobody makes the effort of compiling all this to remove what has been removed, to represent on the same thing all the bits of network that have been added, and therefore responding to incident on a plant that nobody actually has documented from A to Z consists in going to archaeology. And this is actually, I mean, the oldest files only exist in a file, in paper version, not as a PDF, not even on an old CD-ROM, it is only paper. And then you have to understand at page 12 of the document that what the manual same things that this bit was removed. So there's kind of a retrofitting of the documentation to face what was happening. It is the worst case scenario, obviously. During a serious incident, the last thing you want to do is retrofit the documentation, obviously. Very often, people who know their jobs have got everything in their minds, but they have to still be there if they're not retired or been hurt by the incidents. I like what Nicolas said, and thank you for the anecdote on archaeology, but we are the trowel and the brush, and we can help people have an instant snapshot of what the situation is. There are many situations when we install a probe, where we discover things that exist, and others that no longer exist, or things that shouldn't be there. So the concrete example, a freshwater network, we can have a probe and then a machine that it happens that it was a test machine used 6 months ago that was forgotten. And the other thing I was talking about in electricity distribution network, a machine that was decommissioned, but nobody's going to remove it because it's up there in the mountain in a small room. So technically everybody thinks it's not there, but actually it is still there. So very humbly we try to talk about the freshwater network, drinking water network is 2 PLCs to install probes, but it's technically difficult. It's also shadow IT, yes. COVID was a good illustration because we had the case in Canada. A customer wanted to go to the plant and see, didn't want to go there because it was 2.5 hours drive. I installed a 4G modem to access it remotely, so they had no consequences, but it could have been the same consequences of what we had at Colloidal Pipeline in the States when someone had let a VMC that was open to the outside. What about the journaling and backups? Well, what is a backup? Actually, in IT, we know that you have to back it up, you have to do them regularly, you have to store them outside, disconnected from the network to be out of reach from a crypto locker. And we know, and we've known that you have to test them. And a backup that is not tested is deemed not existing. And in OT, they do have backups, so they've received a USB key at the same time as they got the thing. Nobody knows where the USB stick is located. They don't need to back up because they never make changes. The only thing that's got value is the setup. There is no, there's hardly any data. So they don't have the logic of backing up every week. So it's very classic that when you try to restore a bit of a system, that you don't have any backup. And it's a catastrophic scenario because if you have to start that the PLC should be programmed, you have to actually rewrite the program, especially if you have a limited time. So in the best cases, it costs a fortune. On journaling, you do have it, only that it's used for PLC specialists because they're going to look it up and see what happened following a problem, but useful journals for an industrial SOC when you have to trace the incident of an incident, it becomes very complex. So therefore, we do have a couple of cards in hand to see what happened, but it's rather complex. So today we don't necessarily have everything. We don't have acceptable retention time, and you have to do with what you have. And again, you have to train and rebuild with what you have in hand at the time. Very well. So upstream from the attack are the vulnerability of the OT equipment monitored. Are the scenarios up to date? Well, at least we try. We try for those who to try and have a first idea of the. It's an extremely complex problem. We said to know whether vulnerability exists. When we know they're there, what do we do with it? So humbly talked about 48 hours of maintenance every 6 months. But yeah, we sort of smiled at that. I think it's quite a lot. Someone who's very comfortable. When you have several thousand vulnerabilities to solve or fix, if you want to improve the security, we're going to get into securities. How do we process that? How do we solve them? How do we fix issues? Can we do it? Some systems are obsolete that you can no longer correct, so we can have see where the risks are, but I think the vulnerability is not to patch. Of course, you have to detect the vulnerability, you have to patch it when it's a rather large aspect, when nobody is going to decommission that PC physically that's over there, when an industrial network when you have like a water tower, for example, you need someone to patch a PLC niche water tower when you have 15,000. It's just bad, and it's a true difficulty because you will need. We not need to come. You need to compact it, to patch it. It's a classic, but we have faced with. We can see that. The less changes you do, and if it's not broken, I will not fix it. So why patch it? And for him, it's not a problem because the system is working. So we have this internal cultural aspect, but it's specifically true when the cause of the incident is a machine that wasn't patched. It may happen in IT and OT, but if someone said, if I don't repair it, there's something that is not broken, so we have an issue. I think that in IT now we have a majority of people in charge of operations. You may be fired because you haven't patched it, rather than stopping production for 3 hours. From an IT point of view, it's not the case for OT. So there is an incredible gap between knowing there's a vulnerability and correcting it. Given the maintenance windows we have, it's going to take forever. It's a different culture between IT and OT. We try to insufflate this idea. It's better to patch than risk breakdown for so many days or weeks. And it's not easy, and it's not an easy message to convey. Cyber attack is a cause of breakdown like any other. If I have a fuse that blows, I need to know where the short circuit is. If I have a cyber attack, I have to repair it. I have to know where the cyber attack originated from. But first and foremost, it is a cause of a breakdown like any other. And it's probably the first cause of a breakdown. Now, the industrial systems are rather resilient, robust, designed not to break down. And when you found a weak point, you replicate everything. And in mathematical theory, it says that if a system, if I have two system, it's a 1,000 euros square. So systems are extremely resilient, and then the most likely breakdown is cyber attack. It becomes cyber attacks. They may not be convinced of it, but there's a recurring work to do. We have to do everything to convince them that this is what they should invest in, because that's going to cause the first serious breakdown in the industrial system. Even if we cannot solve problems, at least exposing them is a good way to advocate. I was also in IT cybersecurity. There is a true passion in addition to IT people. If they say we cut something, it's like cutting the arm of a baby for a mother. You have to speak the language to make them accept an issue that concerns them. And vulnerability, even if you cannot stop them, if you expose them, the quantity of risk there is, they could open to go further. So yeah, that's you should be educational. If you just have a vulnerability, if we say, for example, that by conveying the message that the whole of the production chain will be stopped for 2 weeks, or is going to alter the quality, they understand it better. Because the technical aspect, you have to talk about the impact and risks and consequences. Yes, you're right. Now, are there specialized teams, communities of sharing information for this kind of situation? Yes, we can promote some of the teams. I could talk about a work group from the CESA, which is the RSSI, where we manage a number of good specialists of the industrial cybersecurity aspect, where we can exchange best practices and the traps to be avoided. Now, the reality is that on D-Day, when there's an incident, or the weeks, as you said, you really feel alone. And I think that Maxime's point about being supported, if you have professionals helping you, supporting you, is better. We're going to tell each other that instance, and this is what happened to me, blah, blah, blah. But the day when it actually happens, you really are alone. In this kind of work groups, we exchange best practices, and actually we exchange the difficulties we've had, and we try collectively to learn from that. And we show pictures of our scars. People lose their hair or have white hair, but it's very important to share. And a few years back, it was rather secret, but today it is being shared, and it is essential. Collectively, we have to share and increase our maturity. Vincent, in terms of cooperation, well, I totally agree. We could do much better. There are several levels of cooperation exchanging with clients, but we also have researchers who do prospects. The two founders of Nozomi are PhD graduates, and we actually recently took part in implementing of the Cyber OT coalition that gathers some of our competitors. So we agreed on beyond our commercial competition how we could share the mutual knowledge we have for the benefit of the OT cyber community. But we can go even further. There were initiatives like the Cyber Campus that we are also part of, that take part in this requirement to cooperate, because nobody will have a single answer to all aspects. Let me come back to this IT. As an industrial stock is better for response as opposed to a unified IT-OT stock?
In fact, I think no. We know that cyber crises are rarely purely IT or OT. The barrier that exists is more in organizations than from a technical point of view. So it is an illusion to think you have a dedicated SOC to OT that would not take into account IT, or the other way around. You know that SOC is a plan to correlate different information, knowing that this event plus that event is something suspect. So if you don't correlate events, and if you have a look at OT separately from IT, as if you had two different brains. Well, it won't work. I was discussing with Vincent earlier on. The most important thing is to detect weak signals. It could be something which is not very important, but which is on both sides, because that's what is important. So we need, within the SOCs, people who understand OT and who understand their ability to intervene and their limits thereof, and who understand that they need to rely on people on the plants to intervene, whereas with IT they have predefined organizations. But if you only focus on OT, expect in very specific cases, well, in most of the cases, you have to have OT and IT converge. To have OT and IT SOC converge will help you be quicker. Of course, you have to correlate both. You work better afterwards in terms of reaction. But today, it's not the case everywhere. You can see in the different stands there are OT SOCs, but it's not the way forward. I think there is a competence crisis and staff crisis. I think it's something recurring. It's a recurring problem here. We witness it here. And the luxury to have both teams is also a difficulty. And in relation to consider two different problems occurring at two different places, I think it's very important. And there are specific teams that have a wider view on different industrial issues. The crisis of the means and resources means that it will be difficult for some industries to have their own SOC, which doesn't mean it's not important for them. I would like to make one reservation. I'm not an advocate of internalized SOC. You don't often have enough resources to do that, but you talked about externalized SOC. Well, from the IT point of view, you can have a standardization, knowing that there is one team dealing with it and that it is dealt with in each BU. So you can have a SOC that can detect and react, knowing that, and if you detect this problem, well, you do this and that. That's meaningful with IT, thanks to centralization. But with OT, there is a consensus that each plant is different, technologically speaking. It's connected differently, so they don't have this need to interchange information with IT. So the firewall may be not very efficient, may not be very efficient. So in the end, you cannot rely on one SOC with one universal reaction mode for each plant. Each plant is technically different. So you could say, okay, the process should be that they give a call to Mr. Smith and tell him, okay, I have a cyber attack, you probably know what to do. You are not probably on the plant 24 hours a day. So if there is someone he never heard of that they call from a SOC that tells him, okay, you have to unplug all your plant. They just won't do it. I won't stop my plant. My maintenance date is in 2 years' time. So the incident response issue steered from a SOC or a crisis unit is to obtain from a guy wired you will never accept what this guy will tell you, even if they tell them to unplug the plant. It's an impossible decision to make. You tell me that to prevent my plant to stop, I have to stop it, but it's impossible. Well, the plant is working, so why should I stop it? So the discussion could be with the SOC, okay, well then, isolate yourself from IT, and the guy will say no, because IT sends me orders. The batches I have to produce every day, if I have to produce my products to send them there, well, SAP from the plant sends it to me, well, I have to stop the plant. So that's a real collective difficulty. And it's especially the case when a SOC is industrialized. Between theory and practice, of course, I protect what hasn't been attacked. But you have in front of you people who don't want to break their systems before, instead of stopping everything. I don't know if you have such operators in the room, and I have a title for next year with a hosted security service. The relationship with stronger relationship with hosting services. We only talk about repairing, constructing after an attack. So in these conditions, in such conditions, how can you convince the CEO to invest in protection and prevention rather than correcting things? I will give you an absurd answer. When you implement a repair system, you can only work 25% of the plant. So I'm not sure it's very satisfactory. So rather than waiting for something to happen, and it will happen, well, I usually say I haven't expected my first car accident to put my safety belt. So some time ago, it's not because you can repair something that you have to stop protecting it. We perfectly know that you need protection capacity, detection capacity, repairing capacity, insurance, and all these layers, particularly in terms of protection, are numerous. So if you leave it aside, it's just having more attacks. Be prepared to have more attacks, which means over-mobilizing people. You will have problems with your insurance. It will pay maybe once in January, maybe in February too, and in March you will pay more, and in April you won't be their clients anymore. So are you ready to have a system that is 70% of the time out of order? That's the actual question. 25 years ago, we were asking ourselves, well, shall I use an antiviral system? Well, today the problem is not that one. I totally agree with it. If you invest, well, we will be here next year. we are told to invest, well, if you do not do anything, it's a problem. So it's always the right moment to begin, whatever the level, even if not everything will be perfect. So to engage in such prevention and protection is the right way forward. Not doing anything is the worst possible option, and preventing is less expensive than repairing, and it's not incompatible. That's the key word. We have to go on investing in protection, but you also have to invest in the training of crisis units that can do both cyber and Indus. When you both treat toxic cloud and the repairing of an information system, well, you need several people to do it, to be ready. What were you talking about? Well, backup? That's it? Backup? That's the word you used? Okay. Sorry, it's very mundane, but backups. It's the last resort of protection. When all the other protections don't work anymore, backups are the last resort. In industrial site, you will have other problems, but if you do not have a backup, you will need many more months to go forward. Maybe, yes, you have to be trained, and yes, you have to have backups and be trained to restore them. And the automation engineer should have a place to do it. Clearly, either you make a restoration test when you don't have an automaton. You have 12 automatons in your process. Well, there are different models, and you have you need 3 different models to try and restore them. How do you do such a test where if you don't have a place to do it? In ITE, well, you buy a new computer. In OT, it's different. You need a lot of hardware, and you don't have such hardware to make a restoration test. So nobody does that. Never. Well, sometimes they have a problem, they change the automaton, and there they make a test because they reprogram the automaton. But that's the only moment when they do it. So this should change. In plants, you should have such a place. It can be maybe not in the plant itself, but these tests should be able to be done. You can never work correctly if backups do not work, and I don't know a backup that can work if it cannot be tested. Okay, now we shall open the room to questions. Are there questions for the speakers? I told you we were super clear. Okay, at the back we have a question. Okay, the mic is coming to you, sir. Good afternoon, Thierry Manciot. Thank you for your speech. I would like to come back to your example of the automation specialist. What is important is to involve business. With Sanofi, it's something we are used to doing, and we are deploying and developing it increasingly. In crisis management, we have specific scenarios where we ask people, how can you produce without IT for 2 weeks? We have to work with them even if we do not have SAP orders, we have to continue producing because we have to cut the site for it not to be destroyed. So this should be done upstream with all of the business players to be prepared for such scenarios. When you have a ransomware that is disseminating, it's important to involve the business and to work in common. Of course, I agree, but the difficulty is in front of you. You have a specific moment, which is that an increasing number of elements are automated. We are not able to work in a degraded mode. We should have something wired and more resilient to cyber attacks. But processes are increasingly complex. Quality standards are more increasingly complex too. When you fill in shampoo bottles, I don't know if you see that in shampoo bottles with all contents, there is an E. It's called 1 liter, and then an E afterwards. This E indicates that the volume indicated is an average, meaning that the bottle may have a little more or a little less than 1 liter. There is an obligation to measure the quantity in each bottle to say that the product has, in average, 1 liter. If this part of the process called weight control is not operational, I can sell my product, but an authority will come and say me, you cannot prove that you sold in average 1 liter of shampoo. So we reached a sophistication level in our industrial processes and an interface between IT and OT that makes that, in theory, we could work without IT and maybe also without the IT aspect of OT, but in real life it's very rare. Most of the time you absolutely need IT and IT aspect of OT. So I have no solution. I would like to have a non-IT production mode. That would be a safety system. We try and do it in a wired manner, but we usually have to do it with IT. Other remarks or questions?
Le faire passer, je pense. Non, il y en a une là-haut d'abord. On a des gens sur toute la rangée, c'est parfait. Travail de solidarité. Et voilà.
Charles-Edouard Ocrat, for Proenedis, you talked about difficulties when exchanging information with automation engineers. Well, what have you implemented to raise their awareness? To raise their awareness with the programs we set up. With Bell, we go to the plants and we have awareness-raising sessions. We also raise the awareness of automation specialists through risk and example methods. We talk about things that could have happened or that could happen to try and inform them. What I said earlier on is that we are living in two different worlds, but we must use the same language. And through these sessions, we managed to go forward with these topics. I would like to add that these people, and I try and be on their side, they like to work with us if we add value. I remember one example where I intervened with my team to retro-document in a prevention mode. And I don't know, we drew their network. It was a satellite plant, and they were delighted. It was the first time, and I was in front of people who knew very well their job, but they had for the first time an exhaustive and comprehensive vision of their plant. I was able to apprehend the whole information. You know how complex it may be, but this work, that's an example here. But if, as RSSI, you can bring added value to the automation specialist, you will gain in legitimacy. And if you want to educate them, they listen to you, because these people are, I might be generalizing, but these people respect your credibility as a professional. Most of the time, they know their job perfectly well. And when you demonstrate them that in our field we are very good professionals, then they respect us. And then the communication flow is perfect. If we tell them to secure this thing particularly, then you manage to have them change their mindset, because we created value. We do not arrive as an auditor or someone who tells them how they have to work. If you do that, it won't work. Thank you very much. Another question here. Good afternoon, Thomas Vadin, Mr. Webston, Company Webston. You talked about industrial SOC. Do you see a lot of them? Is it a standard, or are they mainly IT SOCs? And if there are many of them, are they detected? Are accidents detected by these IT SOCs? Industrial SOCs? No, I don't see a lot of them. To measure the efficiency of SOCs, well, I don't know really. OT SOCs I'm talking about. I think you probably know that it's written OT on all the stands, almost all of the stands. All the SOC players try and do OT SOCs, because when there's a market, of course, everyone wants a part of the cake, a piece of the cake. So I haven't met any OT SOCs that is really differentiating. How can you produce an effect to react to an attack? Well, I haven't found such OT SOCs. OT today is quite difficult to have the required competences. It's nice to have the right hardware, but you also need competences, and it's much more difficult to have. And here the theme is mostly OT, but we'll see what comes next and what comes in the future. And to answer the last part of your question, to now, I have a cyber accident, whatever its height. It's always operational people who detect it because they see, is it normal that the bottles are only half filled? Thank you very much. And they process it as dysfunctioning and not a cyber attack. And they probably realize 2 hours afterwards that the problem comes again. And that's when they contact us. Other remarks or questions? A conclusion to each of you? I would like to come back to what I said earlier on, and on preparation. I think it's the general conclusion. There is not one solution that will help solve the problem. You should not improvise. You should be prepared and work on simulator, to come back to my aviation image. Do backups. Test them and be prepared. Yes, let's get prepared and let's educate people who do a different job as ours, but not that far, and try and really want to communicate. Thank you so much for your experience sharing. Thank you.
Alors, c'est le moment pour nous de faire une petite pause. Je vous propose de prendre un petit café normalement qui vous sera servi.
You will have a coffee at the end of the outside the auditorium. Thank you.